Okay, thank you everyone for joining. We'd like to thank you in behalf of the Fairfax County Economic Development Authority for joining this FinTech and Cybersecurity webinar. We're hosting with a number of interesting presentations. We would like to engage with Israeli companies and explain why Fairfax County is a great location for them. And we hope we can prove it through both US and Israeli partners that we have here that will tell their stories, and through our explaining why the county is such a great place for you guys to be in. Next slide, please. Yeah. So my name is Yair Efrati. I'm the director of the Israeli office. I've been doing that for a number of years now. Work closely with the Fairfax County EDA. We are free of charge for companies to consult with. We help them relocate, move, open headquarters, do any business in the county. And we are very happy to work with the county for over these past few years with very successful stories of Israeli companies establishing their beachhead in the county and making headways into the US from the county and expanding their businesses in the US and in the larger county community. Next, please. Right, the county, Fairfax County, is located in Northern Virginia, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and we think it's a very exciting place to be. It's a very centrally located place, especially close to the federal government, which Washington, D.C. is just across the river. And this federal government over the past maybe 10 years, more or less, have increased its involvement in the economy, more so now during the crisis. And it's one of the biggest client anyone can hope for. And many of the county companies serve the federal government, and the ecosystem there is very good at serving the federal government. And that's one of the key strengths of the county. The county is a very successful place to attract cybersecurity, has been very successful in attracting cybersecurity and fintech companies. Cybersecurity, a lot of it again is because the federal government is such a consumer of security products. Fintech, because a lot of the fintech companies on the East Coast are located in the county. Many credit card companies, financial banks, as you will see in following presentations and others. We have about 35 Israeli companies in the county. We have about 450 foreign-owned companies that are headquartered in the county. And we have a great infrastructure with a direct flight from the Washington airport to Israel. Next, please. It's a very strong technology hub, probably one of the strongest in the US, definitely outside California. We're talking about a serious presence of the Googles, Amazon's, Microsoft, Facebook, and you can see the logos here. There are over 9,000 technology companies in the county. And this is a very important thing for Israeli companies that want to sell their products. The ecosystem is already there. You don't need to look for it. It's there in the proximity. I would like to just say that, to go over our program and say that we will be hearing from people from IATI, Israel Advanced Technology Industries Organization, Main Street Bank, Army Securities, and the security strategist named Michael Johnson, and KPMG, who've been, think we will join us. They had some technical problems, hope they will join us later on. We will go over taxation issues, trends in the fintech area in the county, cybersecurity trends, and success stories of an Israeli company that used the county Army Security as its headquarters. I would like to present Asher Kotz from the Fairfax County Economic Development Authority, Manager of Business Investments, Israel and Cybersecurity. Asher, please.
I forgot I was on mute. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon in Israel. My name is Asher Kotz. I run the Israel desk program in Northern Virginia for Fairfax County. I also cover our huge cybersecurity ecosystem, more than 540 companies. I've been doing it for about 10 years plus. My background, I came from Silicon Valley, so I understand the technology section very well, and I've been doing our program in Israel and before in India as well. We'll talk about the cyber ecosystem and the fintech. So the next slide, please. So what's unique about Northern Virginia when it comes to the financial services, which is different than, of course, New York and other region. Here we focus as indeed on the government and all the services around it, especially when it comes to government contract, software company that need the liquidity to win federal contract. And of course, the huge mortgage industry. We have the two main player, Freddie Mac here in Northern Virginia. Freddie Mac is right here in Tyson Corner where we are headquartered. So we see a lot of companies focusing on their services when it's come to financial services, from the big five to specific consulting like BDO, KPMG also here, PwC. We have a major bank, in addition to Main Street, that we're very much thankful for participating today. We have Penn Fed, we have Navy Federal, banks that specialize in specific offering. And of course, our gorilla in the arena is Capital One, a 500 Fortune company that is one of our best success story in the county. They have actually the tallest building in Washington today, a great headquarters. So this is the fintech. Of course, we have a lot of companies in the technology. You can see on the bottom of the screen, companies that continue to grow and bring a great technology. And a lot of them can be a channel partner and solution partner for fintech and cyber company from Israel. Next slide, please. This is just an overview of the ecosystem here in the cyber. As I mentioned, a lot of cyber companies here focusing on the bringing solution to the federal government, trends such as infrastructure security, incident response, the whole issue of how to secure data in the cloud. So many organizations have moved to the cloud, identity and access control. That's very important. So you see, we have a very nice list of companies, including a lot of foreigners and some from Israel. We have accelerator, we have VCs, and we can help connect companies to the ecosystem here. So back to you, Yair.
Thank you, Asher. I would like to introduce Liat Sokol, Member Relations Manager at the Israeli Advanced Technology Industries Organization, which will also give us some overview about the organization. Liat, please.
Thank you, Yair. Hi, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Liat Sokol. I'm Member Relations Manager at IATI, and I'm so honored to be here and take part in this unique event, which will give you guys an overview about the current trends and opportunities regarding fintech sector and cybersecurity solutions, with the leading of IATI members, Fairfax County Economic Development Authority. So a few words about IATI. IATI is the umbrella organization of the high-tech and life science industries in Israel. We are a nonprofit, and we are supported and funded by companies and entities from all sectors of the ecosystem, including venture capital funds, R&D centers of the multinational companies, mature Israeli companies, startups, incubators, university, hospitals, innovation centers, municipalities, service providers, and more. All of these companies are IATI members. Our mission is to promote and support these industries because we know that they are the main growth engine of the Israeli economy. I would like to thank Asher Kotz for organizing this event. And I would like also to write my email address and phone number if you have any questions. And that's it. And with no further ado, let's begin.
Thank you, Liat. Thank you very much. I would like to introduce now Yaron Katz, a technology taxation partner from KPMG in Israel, to talk about these issues, which are all very important to us. Yaron, please.
I hope you can hear me and see me well. Hello. So I just want to kind of quickly cover what we're seeing in the market in terms of tax and M&A deals here from Israel and cross-border transaction with Israel, with the US. So I'll start. I don't know if you guys have access to the slides. So the first slide's what we call market observation. I'll go quickly over that. So if you can flip to the next slide, please. Yeah. So one thing we're seeing is less concern of retroactive legislation. When Biden took the election, we had a lot of transaction. A lot of people were interested in closing the deals pre-2020 year end, because there was a lot of concern about legislation, adverse legislation, which will be applied from January 1st. I think there's a consensus that we'll have a tax reform, and I'll talk about it later, but essentially, I think there's less concern of retroactive legislation. At a high level, for those of you that are kind of thinking about cross-border transaction, where to set up companies, the Biden tax reform would be less favorable for U.S. multinational compared to the previous administration, the Trump administration. At a high level, the Trump administration 2017 tax reform used what we call the carrot by reducing the rate and so forth, whereas the Biden administration used more of the stick in terms of raising taxes. And there's two, I think that what we see in the clients kind of fall into two buckets. There's those that take actions and try to make sure that they have the structure that align with the new reform, and those that have the wait and see approach. The next point is you probably see a lot of that, large volume of cross-border de-SPAC transactions. We have Israeli technology companies merge with US SPACs. We also have some Cayman SPAC. Many of them were in the news in the last weeks. What we're seeing different this time is that usually the Israeli companies survive as the parent company of the group and become the foreign issuer ultimately on NASDAQ. In the past, it was different. I think one of the reasons is the valuation. If the SPACs comes in, we'll say with even $500 million, then compared to the size of the Israeli companies, just makes no sense to have the SPAC be the US parent company. And last on the market observation, we've seen there's also opportunities for startup companies to set up as US partnership rather than corporations. That allows monetizing, getting more cash for the founders when they go public. For those of you that have heard the term SPAC, I call it SPAC on steroids. But there's definitely more advanced SPAC structures that enable the founders to make more money ultimately. Let's flip quickly to the next slide. That's usually the classic question when you set up a company, what we call a cross, that we know ultimately will be multinational and will have employees in the US, in Israel. So there's usually several questions that you always need to ask yourself. The first one, the founders, whoever consider that, questions need to understand it's a really upfront long-term decision, which could impact the deal, could impact the company and the shareholders going forward. And with this regard, when we tell clients where to set up the companies, there's usually two separate questions. The first one is where the parent company should be set up. Is that a US or Israeli company? Is that a Cayman or Bermuda company? And then the second question is where the valuable assets of the company should be located. When I say valuable assets, the reference is usually to intellectual property. And those are separate questions. The next one, it's not really a tax question. I can tell you that when you're looking for investment, seed investment or round A and round B, US investor would usually push for a US parent company because they might be able to get a tax-free sale when they sell the shares under Section 1202 of the US tax code. So that in itself might just help to make the decision US versus Israeli company. I think it's probably obvious that it's not a one-fit-all solution. I mean, we have companies, Israeli companies, very successful that are traded on NASDAQ, and we have US companies with Israeli subs as well. Another point that people sometimes overlook, Israel versus US tax regime, when you are considering those questions, Israel, on one hand, Israel provides a lot of tax incentives, almost like a tax holiday sometimes, very reduced corporate rate that can go down to 6%. The employees themselves can get a very preferential tax treatment as well on stock-based compensation. The drawback that we're seeing is that the tax law in Israel is less clear compared to the US. And what it means that you need to approach the tax authorities on rulings on every small deals. And that's just unheard of in the US. You don't have that in the US. And that in itself may not be just a viable option for a lot of investors, a lot of companies. So some companies, when they try to weigh that, say, I don't need the lower rate, if that means that every time I'm doing a deal, I have to go and apply for a ruling. Business model, that's another thing that drives the decision. Business model and the type of offering that you have. There's definitely difference between services and products. And last but not least, there's a recent ITA is the Israel tax authorities. There's a notice, a circular that came out recently, and it's, the way I view that, sort of aimed to disincentivize operating via cost plus R&D center in Israel. It's very common for US small or large multinational to have the R&D team in Israel and compensate the Israeli office or the Israeli sub through what it's called cost plus. So leave a small margin, pay tax on that. The Israeli tax authorities looked at what other countries are doing, especially countries like India and so forth, and they wanted to apply a different transfer pricing methodology and in fact tax those centers at higher tax rate. Now, if you're a US company that is profitable, you can say, I don't really care, because I'll pay the Israeli tax and I probably will get a foreign tax credit in the US for that. That's not the case when you have NOLs in the US. So, and that's usually typical for startup companies when you set them up in the US. So there's definitely a difference here, a very big difference between a US startup company compared to US multinational large company that might be able to get foreign tax credit for those Israeli taxes. I think we have time quickly, we'll cover just the last point. So if you can please flip to the next slide. Oops, not one before that. So I think that's probably 2 or 3 minutes to cover. So how does Biden tax reform change the decision of where to incorporate or locate IP? Immediately after the Trump tax reform in late 2017, we've seen a wave, I don't want to say a wave, but there's a lot of very well-known companies, US companies that brought their IP to the US. And I think the notion was that's a tax reform, but what we've seen in reality that was not really necessarily driven by the tax reform. A lot of it was driven actually by global OECD tax proposal that adversely impact them. So I think all in all, it was better off for them to bring the IP to the US. With the Biden tax proposal, it's still a proposal, but since they own the Senate completely, and so the Congress, and they have the presidency, so they can pass those laws if they want to, and they probably will. So as I said, if Trump tax reform attempted to motivate companies to bring the IP and cash to the US, the Biden tax reform would penalize, sort of incentivizing those that do not do so. In other words, again, I think the conclusion after 3 or 4 years that the Trump's tax reform was not that effective in bringing more businesses and cash to the US. I think the estimates in 2017 were that US companies would bring $8 billion to the US. I think they only brought less than $1 billion. So what it means is that ultimately this would adversely impact structures in which the IP of US multinationals is located outside of the US, in countries such as Israel. So that's something to think of and consider when you're thinking of the kind of the initial structure of your company. The two other things just worth mentioning is the individual tax reform, increase of capital gain tax to 40%, and also capital gain at death. I think the impact on investors in Israel is that we'll see less funders inclined to move to the US, which was almost the norm, if you will. A lot of funders, management, just to be close to clients, move to the US. If you move to California, if they do indeed pass this law, you're looking at 40% federal tax plus 13%. So I think other states, if moving to the US, and other states will be, I think, more attractive. And last but not probably the last point here, as I mentioned before, Section 1202 qualified small business stock, which is an incentive to invest in small companies in the initial phases. and in effect get completely tax-free when you sell those investments, those do not seem to be affected. So even with the reform that is aimed to tax wealthy people, that for some reason that provision is still there. So that in itself may be kind of, probably in itself will be a reason to set up US corporation instead of Israeli corporation. So I think that's the last point that I had on that. So with that, I'll take it back to Asher, unless anybody has any questions on this.
Okay, Yaron, thank you very much. We'll have a Q&A session at the end. That remember, you need to stay. I'd like actually, Yaron, I think your 20 years in the US, in Silicon Valley are very, very useful. When you just talked, I just mentioned that you were there for a long time at KPMG and also work at Intel. You earned your MS taxation in San Jose University, which I know. I earned my MBA in San Francisco State University in San Francisco up to Silicon Valley 101. So we were in a similar time there. And you have your BA in Law and Business from the College of Management and Academic Studies in Israel. So thank you very much, Yaron. We appreciate your presentation. I'd like to go now to our next speaker. Please, Mr. Jack W. Dick is the Chairman and CEO of Main Street Bankshare Incorporated, and of course, Main Street Bank. Jeff was actually the co-founder of the bank and held the president title until the end of 2016. Jeff was an advisor on risk-based banking supervision for the Bank of England. So he brings a lot of international experience and served in other positions there from 1996 to 1999. And actually starting his banking career in 1983. Jeff has a really, really extensive background in Northern Virginia, and the whole banking system here in the US. He served on the, for example, on the 5th District Federal Reserve Board, the Payment Advisory Committee. Jeff was also the former chair in the Virginia Association of Community Banks and on the board of director of the Dallas Regional Chamber of Commerce right here in Northern Virginia. Jeff earned the BS and BA in Accounting and Management, University of North Dakota, and also he earned Executive MBA from the University of London, Imperial College of Science, Technology, and Medicine. Jeff, we are honored that you can speak, so please take it away. Jeff, you might be mute.
I thought I had that taken care of. Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll start over. Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon, Israel. As a banker, I am not a cyber technology person. You're not going to want to hear from me about that. So I'm going to be talking mostly about the fintech part of this equation. The first, the financial. It's interesting, in 2009, in the United States, the volume of payments was about 109 billion transactions, totaling about $72 trillion. Come forward another 9 years to 2018, and that has come up to 175 billion transactions and almost $100 trillion. So that's a substantial infrastructure within the United States, supported by the banking system primarily. On the technology side, technology, as you probably know, is now the second largest industry in the United States. It is second only to healthcare, and employment in the technology industry in the United States surpasses the average employment of all other, the average of all other companies combined. The next slide, you can back up a couple of slides, please. I have a quick disclaimer. As a public company, if I make any forward-looking statements or anything like that today, I'll end up filing an 8K before the end of the day, but I don't think we'll go there. About Main Street. Next slide, please. So we started Main Street in 2004. As was said earlier, the Northern Virginia market is just vibrant. right next door to a federal city. And so we've got, wonderful opportunities for growth. Since 2004, we have doubled ourselves organically 5 times. That equates to a compound annual growth rate of 25% over the last 18 years. And we're now with total assets at $1.7 billion. We are traded on NASDAQ, on a common stock and our preferred stock, and we're a Russell 2000 company. We are what we call a branch light organization. Most banks my size probably have about 30 branches. We have 7, and we're probably going to be going down from that number as we progress because we are significant, users of technology in this country. When we opened in 2004, it took 7 days to clear a check from the East Coast to the West Coast. 7 days. I could hold that check for a total of 11 days. Now it probably takes 0.7 of a second for me to make a transaction with somebody in Israel. So, the technology has substantially improved what we do. We have been at the forefront of technology since we opened the company. And our tagline, we have 2 really. The one on this page is bank where you breathe. We'll go anywhere you are, with a mobile app. The other is put our bank in your office. And so we are very much a business bank. And so on any given day, about 70+% of our transactions are actually all processed by our customers. So we've always had an extreme focus on technology. And now we're very much focused on payments. Next slide, please. But before I get to that, it's important to note, again, going back to 1990, we had about 12,500 banks in this country. And now that's down to 4,437 commercial banks. Now, I know in Europe, they have a hard time processing that. And I know in Israel as well, I think you have about 23 banks total in your country with a lot of branches, of course. But our system here in the US is significantly different than that. We have the largest of banks in the world. And then we have smaller community banks such as myself. And, save for a few different product types, we don't do some of the trading that the larger banks do. But technology has been a wonderful leveler because it allows me to provide anything that a large bank can provide. And sometimes we can do it a lot better because we can marry service with that technology and provide a great customer experience. So in the United States, those 4,400 banks represent about 18 trillion in total assets and about 250 billion in net income. The next slide, please. So we want to talk a little bit about payments because that's where we focus on when it comes to fintech. There's a payment side, there's a lending side. You've seen probably a lot of lending apps, a lot of opportunities in that space. We don't go there. We stay on the payment side. Payment processing, as I said earlier, we've got about $1 trillion in payments processed through the country in any given year. $100 trillion almost, and about 195 billion transactions. That's a lot of opportunity, and that's why a lot of fintechs are coming into the space that was primarily and almost always exclusive to banks. And the interesting phenomenon about it is if you look at on this graphic that was provided by McKinsey, the compound annual growth rate for the payments industry is about 25% since 2009 through 2020. Far greater than the other sectors: asset management, retail banking, or corporate and investment banking. So a lot of opportunity, and it's an easier entree for fintechs than some of these other areas. Next slide, please. So when you're looking at a fintech, to start with, you need to have either, if you're going to be in the banking space, you need to have either a bank charter in this country, or you need to partner with a bank. The large banks will partner with, the largest of firms like PayPal, Chime, Dave, I guess. But there's so much space available in the payments industry, and there's so many opportunities that still provide substantial growth, substantial earnings opportunities, and we can be the partners on those opportunities, and we can grow with the fintechs that provide those opportunities. The other thing that we oftentimes can give when fintech companies come to us, they have an idea, and I've seen some extremely wonderful ideas come in, and they know what is required for that idea. They know what's required, to make it happen, but they don't know the banking side of it. And as a smaller commercial bank, we can help with that side of it. We're actually, in the process now of kind of standardizing our compliance training courses, our marketing training, and all that kind of thing, so that, when the fintech comes, to work with us, we can, as long as they sort of, go by what we're working with them, how we tell them things need to be done, they can actually, be pretty much assured that they'll be in a compliant, operating in a compliant manner when they start working with us. In the large banking space, they don't generally give that sort of level of experience that go along with it. You're kind of left to your own devices. So I think the opportunities that we've seen in the space has been a great partnership. As a bank, I'm primarily interested in deposits, and I'm primarily interested in low-cost deposits. The fintech has the opportunity to provide a wonderful user experience to the customer. And I would say that in most cases, the fintech can provide a better user experience to the customer than we can, because our solutions have to cover the whole spectrum of what we do, whereas a fintech can focus on just a portion, and be very successful, portion of the payments industry, be very successful, grow, market, and build a substantial revenue stream. So again, I think the opportunity in this country is great because the payments industry is so strong. The Fed used to say that the payments industry was the third largest industry in this country, and I suspect that it's still way up there if you kind of consolidate everything that's got to do with payments. Technology, just keeps making things more efficient. Like I said, going from 7 days to process a check from the East Coast to the West Coast to now doing it in, a tenth of a second or whatever it might take with technology. And it's only going to continue to improve. Obviously, on the cyber side of the equation, that's the most significant part. Working in an environment where, we have to provide that protection and assuredness, for the experience, so that money's going from one place to another don't get compromised. That's the difficult part of the equation. And as you know, because I know there's a lot of expertise probably on the call today, that's the thing that we have to focus on so much. So when we provide banking as a service to a fintech, we need to be also very assured that they take that same level of control over cyber as we do, if not even better. So the fintech industry is an extremely synergistic partner for community banks and commercial banks in the United States. There's plenty of opportunity to work with others to gain market share, both on the fintech side, as well on the bank side. And, you know, we certainly welcome additional opportunities in the space. And, you know, providing banking as a service is one function that we do. We also just process payments for fintechs that come into this country, and we're not alone. There's several community banks that, you know, have begun to recognize that, you know, it's not a you know, it's not a you know, kind of head-on relationship. It's very synergistic, and knowing the integrity of our partner is the most important thing that we work with, because as a bank, we have our strategic risk and our reputation risk. The reputation is so important within the banking system. So we need to make sure that the fintech partners that we work with have that same sort of you know, approach to that quality, and not you know, we've had people come in with brilliant ideas, but they,
Jeff?
Yes.
We need to move on to Michael to focus on the cyber.
I'm sorry. Okay. I apologize.
No, that's okay. So thank you for Jeff Dick. Great presentation. I think that what we took is the huge amount of transaction when it's come to payment and processing, and it's bring us a great opportunities. Jeff Bank has a great, excellent board, but we need to move on. So the next slide, please. I'll introduce the next speaker, Michael Johnson. We appreciate very much that you are here. Michael brings strategic approach to consulting when it's come to cybersecurity, enterprise cyber risk management, which is very, very important, and other areas in consulting. Michael was, yes, I just wanted to make sure. So Michael was before the CISO of Capital One, and he served in many, many roles in the US government, from the DOD to the White House. So he's bringing a very, very rich experience when it's come to not just cyber for the financial services, but also in a broader view. Michael, the floor is yours, please.
Great. Thank you, Asher. I appreciate it. Hopefully everybody can hear me. So good morning and good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. And I can say, truthfully, as a former federal CIO and a commercial CISO, I benefited a great deal from cyber innovation coming out of Israeli companies. So it's great to be here. First, I thought what I'd do is, I thought it'd be valuable to do a little framing of cyber and some key concepts. And then I'll discuss a few of the current cybersecurity threats and trends. And there's a lot going on, as everyone knows. And then I can give an outlook on some of the cyber best practices and transformational technologies as I see it. So just short framing. First of all, I like to use the definition of cyber as being the use of information and technology to both enable and safeguard the business or a government mission. And when you look at cyber threat actors, you really have to divide them up because their intent and capabilities are different. So I think of them sort of in three tranches. I think of thieves, people who want to get non-public information and monetize it against you. There are thugs. Those are people who want to sort of embarrass you, short your stock, do things like deface your website. And then, of course, there are nation state capable adversaries. I typically call those saboteurs. As Asher mentioned, I did work for the US government, the US intelligence community for 23 years. So I've done a lot of work in that area. And then you also have to remember that cyber risk is really the combination of the threats. So that's the capability and intent of your adversary, the vulnerabilities and the consequences in your environment. And the goal in managing that is sort of threefold. One is to eliminate threat vectors altogether so they don't exist. Two is to have comprehensive controls in place to mitigate the remaining threats. And then three, you have to prioritize against the threats that you face and those risk outcomes for those that you weren't able to eliminate and mitigate. And so you sort of think of those from an existential point of view, what things would eliminate my business altogether. Number two is at scale attacks, which ones would have a devastating effect broadly across my business. And then three, what are the most common ones or the easiest, most likely outcomes, things like ransomware. So what I'm going to do is spend a little time then talking about what's going on in the threats as it relates to financial services, which is sort of the same broadly. And there's been a significant string of cyber events most recently, as everyone knows, and it's very instructive to understand how those threats relate to the actors and how those actors operate and how things can quickly spin out of control. So best example of a real supply chain compromise is, everybody knows, is the Nobilium SolarWinds Orion attacks that happened. And just short reminder, everyone's probably read this extensively, SolarWinds Orion network management products were actually infiltrated by a nation state adversary. This is a classic espionage intended for data collection and potential compromise and not for financial gain. And what's important to remember about this, though, is that as it relates to this hack, many organizations were affected, as many as 18,000 out of 300,000 customers that SolarWinds had. But it's still believed that only about 200 were actually target exploited. So this is where you have to always ask yourself, was an organization infected? But more importantly, was an organization infected and targeted for exploitation? And what's really interesting about this, of course, is the sophistication of the attack. There's a number of reports on this. You probably read many of those. This was a signed attack where someone got into the software development pipeline for this company and actually were able to inject and sign their malicious code in a product that went out that people thought was valid and worked well. Most interesting, of course, is if you look at the timeline, now analysis shows that the SolarWinds impact first started way back in September of 2019. And the hackers conducted their first known tests in September of that year, later like September 12th. It was not compiled and deployed as a package until February of 2020. And as a matter of fact, there's evidence now that in June of 2020, the threat actors actually removed all of the residual infrastructure they'd put in place within the company so that they wouldn't be detected. So lots of interesting lessons learned here, including on the cleanup. One thing I will mention, I have recently talked to a number of companies, one of which is a major US insurance company, that mentioned to me that they were so far behind in patching that they had not downloaded and installed yet the infected update. And I'll just point out that is not a good approach to rely on for cybersecurity, but one that was effective for them. The second most common or most dangerous from an existential point of view are zero-day exploits. So this would be best example of this going on right now is the remote code execution vulnerability associated with Microsoft Exchange server. This has been is known now as proxy logon. It's believed to have been committed by Hafnium, another persistent threat within the environment against on-prem Microsoft Exchange servers 2013, 2016, 2019. And what's really interesting, because it's a pre-authentication vulnerability, that means an attacker can take over your Exchange server without even knowing any valid credentials. This was first observed as an exploitation in around the early January timeframe, I think January 3rd. And all the vulnerabilities were reported to Microsoft on January 5th. It wasn't patched by Microsoft through an out-of-band patch until the 2nd of March, which means it gave nation state adversaries a long time to make use of it. Matter of fact, there's evidence now that 10 nation state capable adversaries have been exploiting this since the beginning of January. And more interesting than that is that it's now being exploited through human-enabled ransomware attacks by thieves. So this is an example of where nation states found something, were leveraging it for a long period of time. It exploded in the number of nation states trying to make use of it. And then the thieves found out about it and they started to leverage it for sort of classic ransomware type of attacks. The last couple interesting things that are going on right now have to do with cyber physical systems. People have probably heard about attacks against, for example, the Oldsmar water treatment facility in Tampa, Florida, or the Verkada security camera issues. Many of those lack the sophistication of the attacks we just talked on and could have been solved with really information and technology management best practices. And so that's the last thing I just want to talk to really. As far as trends, et cetera, I'll just mention a couple. But first, I always have to say up front, and I cannot overstate this, if you have one more dollar to spend or one more piece of resource to put at trying to protect your enterprise, you must invest in information technology management best practices. So multi-factor authentication, network access control, network segmentation, et cetera. And of these, the most important is understanding comprehensively, continuously, and in an automated means asset management. You cannot protect or defend what you don't know about and what you can't see and what you can't actively manage. And this is why solutions like Armis, you're about to hear from Barak right after me, which is an agentless way to do security and look at unmanaged devices across your environment is so important. So two quick trends, and then I'll wrap up. One is secure enclaves. So if you haven't heard about secure enclaves, this has been something that's been in the development for tens of years. Secure enclaves provide CPU level hardware level memory encryption on every server by automatically encrypting the memory of all application and data running. So think of this as sort of an extension of what previously was hardware security modules. The reason this is so important is this allows you then to protect not only data at rest and data in transmission, but also data in memory, including your entire memory space. And what's really great about this is that the hardware support is currently being built into all CPUs, Intel and AMD, et cetera. And there are offerings now from all the major providers, including Amazon Web Services, Azure, GCP, et cetera. And with this, you can really get down to two things: security related infrastructure protection for your complete applications, and then assurance that even if you're deploying your application in untrusted environments, it's protected and you have attestation. The second one I'll just mention, and then I'll pass it back to Asher, is around enterprise cyber risk quantification. Every board of directors knows they have a fiduciary responsibility to ensure that their corporate management team quantitatively manages enterprise cyber risk. Very few companies do this. I have personally directly involved with hundreds of boards of directors of companies in the US, and I can tell you, I can count on one hand the number of companies that actually do this. And what's really crucial about this is quantitatively understanding your enterprise cyber risk so that you can prioritize and manage the efforts against those risk vectors and making sure you're lowering your risk profile. There are a number of really great technologies coming out right now that are supporting this, and a number of those are coming from Israeli companies. So with that, I'll thank you very much and turn it back to Asher.
Hey, Michael, thank you very much. It was really brief and very, very to the point of the risk and the more risk that we're facing. So the next speaker, actually the last one for the program before we'll do the Q&A, please the next slide for Barak. So Barak Ben Rachel, he's the general manager of the R&D operation of Armis here in the US. The company just arrived about a year ago here to Northern Virginia. Barak has a long experience and background in working with small team and growing the team when it's come to R&D and development. He worked for several startups, a lot of them in Israel. Also, if I see correctly, also Barak had several years with Intel, so it's giving him both small and large corporation background, and of course now it's his current role in Army Security. So Barak, please take it away. You have about 9 minutes, so be to the point. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Asher, and good morning and good afternoon to everyone. And thanks for the opportunity to speak here about Armis and our leading agentless device security platform. And I'll also talk a bit about why we chose the Fairfax area as our second place for the second R&D site outside of Tel Aviv. So I'll start maybe next slide. So I'll start a bit about the main issue or the main problem that Armis is here to solve. So in today's world, enterprises are experiencing a huge explosion of devices. During the last decade, other than what you usually had in IT environments where you had desktops, laptops, servers, they're called managed devices. You can actually track them. You can install agents on. It would be very easy. But in today's world, where over 90% of devices are unmanaged or unagentable, as we like to call them, you can't really install anything and you can't really track them in an easy manner. And this can be anywhere from HVAC systems to smart TVs to printers to door locks. And you can pretty much think of any type of device in medical industries, in the fintech and finance industries, in the transportation industries, and pretty much everywhere else. So this is all great, which we have a lot of different connected devices, but the main issue is that these connected devices really didn't have security in mind, which means you have tons of devices that are actually connecting to your network. You can't really upgrade them, you can't really track them, and that's a main security issue. Next slide, please. So this is kind of where Armis comes into play. And like every good solution, we can describe it in three main parts. So the first part of the Armis solution, and we do this in an agentless way and in a passive way, we integrate with the customer's network. And we can actually give a mapping and an inventory, first of all, just like Michael mentioned. We can give a whole picture of what's connecting or trying to connect to the customer's network. We do that by a simple connection to either existing infrastructure or cloud assets or whatever it may be that you already have in place. And we can track all the devices that you have. So that's the first part, and we give you a full picture of all of these devices that are trying to connect or connected to your network. The second part of the solution is once we have that mapping and inventory, we can actually recognize different behaviors, and this can be good or bad behaviors, such as devices changing their IP address a lot of times, or using too much bandwidth, or maybe connecting to certain parts of the network that they're not supposed to. So these are just a few basic examples of things that we're able to recognize. The third part of the solution is based on that mapping and inventory and behavior recognition, we can actually take actions. So we can take passive actions, as I mentioned before, and we like to do. We can alert at different levels on what we find, and we can leverage our entire knowledge base of over 500 million devices that are tracked daily to actually give you insights into your environment. So we can alert at different levels passively, or through integrations with existing infrastructure, we can take more aggressive measures, and we can block devices, we can limit them, and we can do a lot more. Next slide, please. So our deployment is very easy and very efficient, and it's very frictionless. You don't have to install any agents. You just connect to existing infrastructure, as I mentioned before. And we have virtual collectors pretty much that are connected to your network. And this can be in any industries, whether it's finance or medical or transportation or whatever it may be. And we can actually integrate to those environments and to those tools. And in a matter of minutes and hours, instead of months that it used to take for different companies earlier in the decade, we can actually get all the information that we need. And we can actually glean information on that and give you the insights based on our knowledge base. And we can also leverage our knowledge base from all of our different customers and give you insights into your actual environment. Next slide. This is just a bit of the integrations that we have currently. So as you can see, we can integrate with a lot of different service providers and network infrastructure to glean the information and to actually track and take actions on all of those. And by the way, if you have something that you don't see here, we're very quick to develop new integration and to add to our existing base. Next slide. So this is a slide I made a bit just on the financial industry. So these are just some basic scenarios that we can really help out with, whether it's asset management and inventory, hardening of specific floors if you need it, procurement of devices. We noticed a lot of customers actually have this issue where they don't really know where their devices are at, and that way they're losing lots of money on actually lost devices. And we can actually also help with compliance and regulatory aspects as well. Next slide, please. Next slide. So this is just the same. So a bit about Armis and what we do. So we've been around for the past 5.5 years. I've been with the company for the past 3.5 years, ever since we're 15 people globally, and now we're around 370. We have hundreds of customers from Fortune 100 to Fortune 50 and so on. We actually got acquired a year ago for 1.1 billion by Insight Ventures and Google Ventures. And actually the slide is a bit outdated because a month ago, we actually announced another round of financing and a partnership with Brookfield, and that brought our valuation to 2 billion. And again, we're tracking around 500 million devices daily, which we can leverage that to all our different customers. We have over 300 deployments at different sites globally, whether they're customers or POVs, proof of value, as we like to call them. And the main R&D side is actually in Tel Aviv, and the rest of the company is in the US. Around 170 people are in Tel Aviv, in our main R&D center, and the rest are marketing, sales, solution architects, customer success, and so on. Next slide. Now I will talk a bit about why did we choose the Fairfax area as our next site for operations, and a bit about our requirements and what happened since. So as I mentioned, I actually moved here a year ago. When talking with our founders, when we were trying to think of the next R&D site, we're trying to think of what are our main goals. So one of the main goals was actually to be a knowledge base and hub for the rest of the company in the US and bridge the gap as we saw challenges between communication and also technical abilities and helping everyone in the US. And for that, we wanted to have an R&D site here in the US. The second main goal is we actually have federal customers and we want to onboard more. So the Fairfax area was kind of a no-brainer because it's very close to the federal government. There are many companies and agencies around, so it was very easy. The third goal or requirement that we had, we knew that we wanted to open the site here on the East Coast. And that's mainly time zone wise. So we can work and there is an overlap with the Tel Aviv office. So that was also a very easy decision. So how does Reston and Fairfax in general fit into all these requirements? So time zone wise, it's great. When it's morning here, it's afternoon there. There is an overlap and it's very easy to work together. Accessibility wise, there is a direct flight, or worse, if there isn't a direct flight, you can fly to New York and just hop on another plane and get here pretty quickly. There is great talent, and that's really what we looked for with all the different companies that were mentioned before and universities. And as I mentioned before, regulation-wise and government agencies, they're very close by and you can really hit them up very easily. So what happened since a year ago when we actually moved? So we scaled up the R&D site. We're looking for more people. So if you know anyone, feel free to jump on the link and also send us your CVs. The Fairfax County was actually very helpful with supporting us with different connections to local partners and local companies. And we hired great talent, and we're looking forward to the future to scaling up our R&D site here and just connecting to a lot of different agencies and companies as well. That's it on my end. I tried to run through it very quickly. So thank you, everyone. And I'll wait for the next session with questions.
Barak, thank you very much. By the way, that picture there on the slide is where your new office here, where the Google building near the metro station. It's about 10 minutes from the airport, by the way. And there are direct flight that will be resumed later this fall back from Reston to Tel Aviv by United.
Okay.
We're gonna move to the next segment. We're almost done. We're gonna do a quick break. We're gonna do a poll that will gauge a little bit some of the prospects coming to Northern Virginia. We need to see the poll slide, please. So this is a very quick process. 2 questions. You can see, are you planning to expand to the US market within the next 12 months? I think it's a great time to do the planning now when the economy is opening and more cyber contract coming in Northern Virginia and Fintech as well. Second question, if yes, are you interested in talking to investor? We can help. We have a network here that can help with investment. So let's see the results. Please fill the poll and we can see the results, I think, soon. This is remind me of Jeopardy when we're waiting for the results, right? And now we can see a very nice process. Thank you, Katie. 70+% yes, planning to come, and similar percent, 71% interested in talk to investors. So guys, I think it's a great indication from both the community in Israel, maybe community in Northern Virginia, that things are coming back and the economy is moving forward and we are optimistic, and Fintech and cyber is hot. A lot of money, a lot of valuation, and a lot of money in the system because of the American Rescue Package. So it's a great timing to plan the expand in Northern Virginia. Now we're going to move to the next segment, which is a Q&A session for a few minutes. Let's bring back our speakers. Next slide, please. So we have Yaron, please come back, Yair, Barak, Michael, Jeff, and myself. Let's see if we get some question from the chat, but I will start with some question that I think is important. Yaron, I'll go back to you. The issue of currency exchange, what do you recommend, especially the shekel is strong, the dollar might go weaker because there's so much money in the system. What's your take quickly about the planning for the currency exchange and what to do?
You know, that's definitely an issue here. In this regard, Israeli companies act like their US counterparts in the sense that the main currency you compared everything against is the US dollar. That's the reporting currency. For a lot of companies, you can actually follow your Israeli tax return in US dollars, and the transactions, especially if you are in the B2B business, that's usually US dollars. So B2C, it varies. So what we're seeing, a lot of companies do hedge the cost, which is mostly, say, the R&D cost of Israeli employees in shekels. And yeah, you just have to be strategic about that. I mean, there's forward, there's option transaction, all over that. But from tax perspective, there's identification process and other documentation that is required for PFIC purposes. A lot of those companies in Israel initially could have an adverse status, a negative status called PFIC, and that to the extent they earn interest income. And if you don't do it right, a hedge gain could be viewed as interest income for US tax purposes. So that's just kind of an issue that you have to think of when you're doing those hedges. But hedges are very common. FX, I mean, US dollars, shekels, hedges are very common.
Okay, very good. I think it's important to know. I have a question for Michael, back to you. You know, it's a combine of two questions. The last year, there's a massive movement to work from home, moving to the cloud because our old infrastructure did not support remote access. So everyone moved to the cloud, or most of them, and that's exposed the workers and the consumer to a lot of threat, especially when it's come to financial transaction, working from home. What do you see the threat here, and what do you see also the solution, maybe AI that give more tools for the banking and other bodies that regulate and alert against those fraud? Please address that.
Yeah, great question. I'll try to answer both. So we've seen, of course, volumes of attacks, both on consumers and institutions, continue to rise. But I believe most people consider that to be in line with a trend pre-COVID. So it's not like it's spiking because of COVID. It seems to be rising despite of COVID. I think the two interesting things you point out, though, one, sort of forcing everyone or most everyone to work from home, at least knowledge workers, means that we're getting a lot more targeted attacks against workers in their environment. And this is especially a problem where you don't have zero trust sort of technology and you have workers using like their own endpoints, et cetera, that may not have the same cyber hygiene as a corporate device. Not always, but sometimes. And then I think the second major trend is that we're also seeing sophisticated use of sophisticated tools by less sophisticated actors. I mentioned earlier the recent ransomware attacks, which I think are called Deer Cry, where they used basically the same exploit as the Microsoft Exchange. But if you look at, and a lot of analysts have done this, if you look at the tooling and what they did, it's very much less sophisticated. So they were riding on the backs of very sophisticated actors to be able to exploit what was going on. As far as AI, really, the key to AI in the cyber realm is understanding a better baseline. So focusing on your limited analyst time on the most important signals, et cetera, and understanding signal from noise. And then there is a lot of work, of course, in task automation and automating response to cyber events. And most of the really great cyber capabilities that people are developing now have some level of ML or AI associated with it.
Okay, very important. As we have more risk and more money in the system. Jeff, I'm going to go back to a question about the PPP. I know mainstream bank maybe have dealt with the grant and PPP. What do you guys see? How you guys handle requests for PPP that came via your bank, and what's the risk that you guys saw?
Yeah, that's been a wonderful program for stimulating the economy in this country, and highly successful. We were a significant player in it. We were able to pick up a lot of new customers with it, but I think it really made the difference this past year as people struggled to have their doors open. It's a testament to the U.S. government and everything they could do to sort of augment this sort of health-related, financial crisis. The programs in the federal government, I mean, they've been very good to work with. It's a bit of a moving target, but net, I think it's helped a lot of small and big companies.
Okay. By the way, I heard there's $63 billion abuse of the system last year from the first PPP. So Justice Department has a lot of work to do.
Yes.
Barak, a quick question for you. There was the growth, the huge volume growth of IoT devices in the system. You guys see any silver bullet that can not just block, but also alert and prevent acceleration of the damage?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for the question. So as I mentioned, there is an explosion of devices. So the main thing that every company really needs to have in place, just as Michael mentioned as well, we need the asset management. We need a full picture. Every company needs this, a full picture and visibility into what's connecting to their network. And whenever a company doesn't have this, it's just another huge open door for bad actors to do anything malicious, either to get information, to get access to the network, and so on. So again, with the Army solution or with any solution to have asset management, that's a great thing to have. Okay,
I got one question, two questions from the chat. One, yes, the session will be available. A, we'll have availability of the slide. B, we'll have it on our YouTube channel. You can see it again. And then a specific question, what are the current state on the US-Israel cyber cryptocurrency technology development and opportunities in startup partnership between the two countries? I can answer a little bit more higher level, maybe Yair can chip as well. There is a lot of collaboration between the US and Israel on specific area, health IT and cyber, infrastructure, IoT, energy security. There is also on the financial system. I don't know exactly about the cryptocurrency. That's something that might be even more specific for grant, but we have several organizations like the Birds Foundation and others that give grants several times a year for joint US and Israeli company to specific research and commercialize the solution to the market. They have been around 40 years plus. They funded more than 1,000 projects. It's a very, very successful organization that was established with the US and Israel government, and it's a joint board. And I can reach out about that specifically. Yair, anything else you might want to add as our partner in Israel?
Yeah, no, I think it's been, Fairfax is really, it's an easy sale because it's such a great location to do business from. Very centrally located on the eastern seaboard. And I think it's a very, very good location, especially if you do business with the government and with companies that are not just investment banks / financials in New York, but you do technology that relates to finance or cybersecurity, like our webinar, government contracts, defense, homeland security, very, very much so as the best choice you can choose to be in the US.
Okay, thank you. Last slide, I would just like to thank everyone, our partners, KPMG Israel, IATI, Main Street Bank, Michael Johnson, thank you very much. I think your insight is very, very valuable, what's need to be done. And of course, Armis Barak, we really appreciate your time, preparation, and presentation today. As Yair mentioned, we're acting as a team. We have a beachhead in Tel Aviv. We have a main headquarters and the landing pad. Think about it as a rover that's coming to Mars. You land in Washington Dallas Airport and you start to drive to the Washington, you see the big sign right and left. This is the vibrant ecosystem of fintech and cyber and the cloud and the data center that you will expect to be part of. We are here to help with business development, with reaching out to companies, to finding resources, finding office people, maybe some grant. I think it's a great model. We've been doing it for 15 plus years. There are 35 companies from Israel here and a lot of cyber, by the way, companies here. So yes, I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and we're ready to support your expand to the US, and also if you're already in the US, expansion to Northern Virginia. Thank you very much.